started at the beginning of the semester, you were brilliant, you were engaged, you were energetic, and now you're just trying to get that last paper submitted. You're just trying to make it to the end of the semester. And whatever skills and talents and abilities you brought at the beginning of the semester, those are gone. You're just trying to submit things and check that box. That is the inspiration.
And that's like a good commentary for us to think about because we're in the business of wisdom here at Calvin. And I didn't want to just leave that up there because that seems ominous. And so I just wanted to remind you that as we go through Romans, just around the corner from this passage, there's this section titled God's righteous judgment, the Jews and the law, God's faithfulness, no one is righteous, and then that righteousness through faith, that great passage. All have sinned, all have fallen short, and all are saved through God's grace. But today, we're gonna look at that moment where there's the wise becoming fools. There feels like there's some intentionality there, like there's some willful forgetting. And that's what I want to think about, and I want to talk about that today. So I want to take you back. I want to take you back to that moment. Maybe it was the first day of this fall semester. Maybe it was the first day of your first year on campus. Maybe it was that first glossy brochure you got from Calvin, and you saw this. Calvin University. Thinking deeply, acting justly, living, but not just living wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. There's that moment of bigness. And then there's the reality that, like, college is hard. And there's that moment where you take that biology exam and they ask you to define homeostasis, and it's totally gone, and you just write down homeostasis. It's when you stay home all the time. And you know it's wrong, but that's just the best you've got at that point. So I want us to think about that because we're at the end of the semester, so you know what time it is right now. It's quiz time. I don't know if Pastor Mary and Pastor Paul are big on quizzes in chapel, but because of the nature of today, this feels like we should do a little quiz. So I've got a question up there. Does the sun go around the earth, or does the earth go around the sun? Now, you should be saying to yourself, I can't believe this is the question you're asking, but that's fine. I'm not asking this question. This is actually part of a questionnaire from the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation, it's a group of nerds, and every 2 years they call people across the spectrum of America, and they want to assess, does America have a good knowledge of the factual scientific information? And they ask 12 multiple choice questions. This is one of them. Now, for further context, over on the left-hand side, that's Copernicus. So he published a heliocentric version in the 1500s. So we're not talking about knowledge that's like cutting-edge stuff. We're talking about like Galileo. We're talking about Copernicus. We're talking about stuff that you definitely know is true. All right, so how do we do? So the average correct for this answer is 73%. Now, you may think, 73, that's not so bad. But I want to remind you, there's only 2 answers for this question, which means if no one knows the answer and everyone guesses, 50% of the people are going to get it right. So that's the red line up there. 50% means you don't actually know anything, and it's only the stuff above that red line. And I want to point out something else. The lines are going down. Who answers this question really well? Honestly, you do. The people that are in school, they have learned information and it sticks. And then you get old in my group, and we start to lose that information. And there's a comment where I want to say to you, that makes sense, right? Think about the way we talk about the sun. It rises in the east. It sets in the west. It's high in the sky. It is low on the horizon. We talk about the sun like it's moving. And even though you know it's true, that day-to-day effort, that day-to-day experience, it changes the way you see the world. Now that's great, but you knew the answer to that one. And I also want to make something clear, because it feels like as a professor I'm at because, back in the day, I took PChem. So my junior year, I took this class called physical chemistry, and I did a bunch of algebra, and I did a bunch of calculus, and I worried about adiabatic expansion, and I worried about the energy in a Carnot cycle, and it was really, really, really hard, and I struggled. And I would reserve the Spanish language carols so that I could watch movies while studying for this class, and I would have nightmares about turning in lab reports. And by the end of the semester, I did a lot of the things. Maybe you don't do these. I didn't change my clothes for a week because I didn't have time for that. And I didn't shower for a couple of days because I'm just trying to make it through the finals sessions. And there's a moment where in that busyness, you have that conversation with your college roommate. So those are the stairs that I had my existential college roommate crisis conversation. So my roommate was a political science major. I was a chemistry major. We sat on those stairs in the spring of our junior year, and we said, "Hey, Jack, do you think we're ever going to amount to anything?" And Jack paused, and he said, "No." And then he paused again, and he said, I think our lives would just be easier if we were missionaries. Which was tough to hear, because as a chemistry major, that does not feel like I am on the right path. In full disclosure, Jack is a missionary, so be careful those conversations and who you room with. But so I have this moment, and there is the echoing of the Holy Spirit saying, you know a lot of things, but what are you going to be? So I did what you might do. Don't do what I did. I got a book called Discovering God's Will for Your Life. And it's like a workbook, like you fill out information. And I was like, I am going to figure out the plan. And when I am done with this book, I'm going to have my life charted out. And it's going to be great. Okay, so I finished the book. I was no closer to knowing God's will for my life than when I started. So I did maybe the other thing that you should not do. I would just randomly open the Bible and be like, I'm going to find a verse, and it is going to speak deep truth and meaning into my life. And so I read this verse from 2 Thessalonians, and it says, we urge you in the Lord Jesus Christ, hey, settle down and earn the food you eat. Now, that verse is directed towards the unrighteous, but I was willing to accept that maybe I was the unrighteous, and it sounded like I should just get a job and pay my bills. And at least that sounded like something I could do. And we are a forgetful people. And I don't know what your experience is like, but I read the Bible and I get so frustrated and angry. You know what I mean? Like the Israelites, they're in Egypt, and through miraculous intervention, they are saved and pulled out of Egypt. And what do? They grumble. What food will we eat? What water will we drink? It would be better to go back to Egypt. Have you forgotten? In the New Testament, Matthew 13 and 14, Jesus feeds the 5,000. Next chapter, the apostles are there. There's a crowd of 4,000. And do you know what the apostles say? We should disperse this crowd. How will we feed them? I don't know what the Aramaic phrase for didn't you read the previous chapter is, but it seemed as though they forgot. And it seems as though that is our willful reality as people. Learning, growing, forgetting, all at the same time. So what do we do? So for me, no problem. Petty larceny. I was in college and I borrowed a devotional classic from my cross-country coach. I have now had this devotional for 27 years, and I haven't returned it, so it sure feels like I stole it more than I borrowed it, but here we are. And I was reading it, and in there's a quote. There's this wonderful passage from Bernard de Clairvaux, apologies to the French department. There are those that seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge. That is curiosity. I have been there. There are those that seek knowledge to be known by others. That is vanity. I confess I have been there too. There are those who seek knowledge in order to serve, and that is love. And there was a moment where I was reminded, hey, maybe this business that you're about, the problem that I have, this problem of forgetting is that we have lost our purposefulness. We have lost our true north moment. So everything's great. All right, well now we get into the fun part of the talk. We get into my discussion about chemistry. How's that going? All right, so I've gone on in my life. I'm a professor at Calvin, and in addition to the work that Calvin does in the classroom on this campus, Calvin is in the world. And so with some frequency, I go down to Ecuador with the Clean Water Institute, with engineers, with psychologists, with chemistry majors, with pre-health majors, and we spend time in communities like this working on their drinking water system. Now, I want to be clear, this is not what I thought that I would do with my life. But with some regularity, this is my life. So here we are, we're in this community, and you can see some of those brown dirt patches. And those are trenches that have been dug, pipes laid, and then reburied. And my role as a chemist is all about disinfecting the water. There are microorganisms that live in your water, so we treat it so that you have first world water. Now, this is rural Andean Ecuador. These are displaced and ignored peoples. And these are small communities of 100 to a few thousand people. And they invite us in, and we try to leave them with water that will sustain. And you know what? We've gotten pretty decent at it. So that community, that's Achuai. And this is like the nerd engineering EPANET map of their water system. And we dose in chlorine. And then we go throughout the entire community and we measure how much chlorine is in their distributed water system. And what we find is it's a lot of red dots. It isn't real good. Not a problem. That was like year 2. So we came back again and again and again. And after about 7 years of working in this community, we get here. And that sure looks like all greens. I know that there are some yellows, but we're going to live with it. And it feels like we got there. Water's good. People are healthy. Things are awesome. Now, I don't want to talk about Achuai. I actually want to talk about this other community called Seneca Juan Grande. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's an intersection. Seneca Juan Grande is 400 meters away. These communities are neighbors. And we went down, and we knew what we were going to do. We were going to wash, rinse, and repeat. So this is Seneca Juan Grande, and we have their water catchment, the location that water comes into the community. We collect the water. We pump it up a big hill to a reservoir, we dose it with chlorine, and then gravity flows the water down to all the houses of the village, and they get clean, wonderful, excellent water. And we do what we do. We show up and we test the water to see that it has chemical contamination or if it is clean. And the data got weird. So the orange bar in 2020, there's just not a lot of chlorine in the water. That's fine. That was our first year. Didn't work great, but it's year 1, no big deal. We go back in 2021, and I got to tell you, I was convinced it was going to be awesome. And that bar, for those of you following at home, is one of those like, how much chlorine is in the water? About 0.5 ppm plus or minus 0.5 ppm. And those error bars are bad for that measurement. And in fact, it got crazy because we would visit a house early in the distribution system, and it would show no chlorine. Well, the water just flows downhill, so if the early houses have no chlorine, the houses further down, they're going to have no chlorine too. And we did our due diligence, and we tested them, and guess what? They had tons of chlorine. And then we'd go further down in the system, and they would have no chlorine. And then we'd go further down in the system, and it was weird. And we grouped up, and we nerded out. Concentration's right. Pumping is right. Are the pumps working? Are the pipes fragmented? Do we have intrusion of water? Blah, 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 blah. And we got busy, and we didn't know. And then we talked to one of our colleagues down in Ecuador, and he said, I actually think I know what the problem is. He said, the problem is that in Achuay, this is what our time looked like. When I studied the water, we met with the community. They had done all the work. They invited us in. We would have food and meals with them, and they would show us where to go, what to do, and how to be a part of their community. And we would do our best to be hospitable to them. When they had a work day, we would work by their sides. Now, at 14,000 feet, I didn't do a lot of work because I would be exhausted and I would have to lay down, but I was present. And as a foreigner, they invited me into their lives. And in Sanacawan Grande, I was there as the technical expert to fix their problems. And so when we talked about what had we missed, we had forgotten that most important point. We didn't love that community. We were there in our vanity to deliver an answer, but not to love them. And that lands hard when you have tried to figure this out and you think that answer is settled and you're going to do it right for the rest of your life. It is easy. Remembering is hard. So who are we? It is the day before Thanksgiving break, and you have labored, and your labors continue. But who are you? Are you a forgetting people, or are we a remembering people? By a curious quirk of calendar scheduling, Sunday, 5 days from now, is actually the start of the church calendar. It is the beginning of our Advent season. I wish I could say that I had planned that. I wish that I could say that there had been some sort of divine orchestration, but honestly, I'm just grateful. Grateful for this. Forgetting is probably who we are. You, me, everyone. But we have the opportunity to be a people of remembering. So on Sunday, the day before you come back to Calvin, the day before the big push begins to get to finals week, we have the opportunity to be a ritual remembering community. Am I saying you shouldn't work hard? No. You have been gifted brilliance. Use it. But do not forget the purpose of your brilliance. There are pathways on this campus that you will walk today. Maybe someday you will return and walk those same pathways. Be a people of remembering. Be a people that carries with you the good news that our work is not in vain. Our work is to serve, to love. And in some moment, when you see that you are expected to be Christ's agents of renewal, remember that your good work today, tomorrow, is for purpose. And build in those rituals of remembering that we may be a remembering people. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Takes me places I don't want to go. Right before me, my heart aches with sorrow as I hit the road. Christ be